You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to episode 24 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. For more news and updates relating to social media and politics, you can follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Social Media and Politics Podcast. All right. Thanks again for tuning in. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. And special thanks to those of you who have left us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, helping us game those algorithms. Really appreciate that. And nothing brings me greater joy than seeing our podcast ahead of Alex Jones's InfoWars, at least in Denmark. So thank you for that. Got a real treat for you guys this week. I'm going to be speaking with Matthew Oczkowski. He is head of product at Cambridge Analytica, which is a company you may have heard of recently. They've been in the news a lot. And Matt was also the chief digital officer for the Scott Walker campaign in the latest U.S. elections. And after Scott Walker dropped out, switched over to heading digital for Donald Trump's campaign. So, this interview came about, again, as part of a paper that I've been working on with Snapchat. So we talk about that in the beginning, and then we switch over to talking more about what it's like to run a general election from a digital strategy standpoint, what type of data is used to build audiences that are then given persuasive messages through microtargeting, and we clear up some misconceptions about that. And what I really liked about this interview was that through talking with Matt, you get a real sense of the mindset of some of these guys who are heading big time digital campaigns, their attitude, their way of thinking, their drive. It really comes through. So I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, shoot it around on Twitter. Let's crush Alex Jones. And without further ado, let's cut to the tape. My guest today is Matthew Oczkowski, head of product at Cambridge Analytica and former chief digital officer of Scott Walker for America. Matt, thanks so much for taking the time out, and welcome to the Social Media and Politics Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so before we get into the host of questions I have for you about the Walker and Trump campaigns, I'm curious about your professional background. Have you always been working with political campaigns and data analytics?
Yeah, so my background really started with computer science. I was a self-taught programmer throughout high school and college, was really kind of into the tech nerd scene, I suppose, and thought I would always pursue a job probably somewhere more typical like in New York or Silicon Valley at some type of startup. But towards the end of my tenure of college, I really caught this bug for U.S. political campaigns. And if you talk to anyone who works in the industry, it certainly is a bug. And my first major campaign that I ever worked on actually was for Senator John McCain for his presidential run in 2008. And I was one of four engineers at the RNC at that point in time. And after that race played itself out, I was like, that was fun. I'm going to go do something else. And fast forward almost 10 years later, and I'm still at the intersection of where technology meets campaigns.
And how is that? I mean, in terms of the hype or the intensity, I mean, it's intense, right? The campaign is it's a flurry of activity.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. And it's also a very small world. I mean, when you're talking a deep understanding of technology inside of campaigns, at least on the Republican side, there's maybe 8 to 12 of us that have been working in this for a while that really understand this stuff to a deep level beyond just like the vanity words and metrics that people use in tech or digital or data. Mm-hmm. And the pace, yeah, it's insane. I mean, I feel like I haven't stopped for the better part of the last 5 years. And I moved to Wisconsin in June of 2013 to build the roadmap for Scott Walker's gubernatorial reelect and his presidential run. And that's almost 3 years ahead of a presidential cycle. And ever since that point in time, on Trump, we were working 7 days a week, 12-hour days for the last 4 months of the election. So it is a nonstop grind.
So you actually picked up and moved to where the campaign is. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I have moved 9 times in 8 years. I have so going back to 2013, I moved to Wisconsin for Governor Walker. After the gubernatorial reelect, I moved back to D.C., moved back again 3 months later for the presidential. Presidential ended in a blistering 71 days. After the presidential was over, moved back to D.C., then moved to San Antonio for the Trump campaign in Texas. And then I moved back to D.C., and 2 months ago I moved to New York City. So here we are.
Jeez. So speaking of Wisconsin, starting out with the Republican primaries, you were the chief digital officer for Scott Walker.
Right.
And for our non-U.S. listeners, that's the governor of Wisconsin. And he happened to be my favorite Snapchatter, and that was because of his direct address. He was always saying, "Hey, Snapchat, this is what we're doing." And I really like that kind of communication part using the medium. But I have a couple questions about that first. So when did you launch the Walker Snapchat channel, and kind of what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah. So, Governor Walker is a very authentic candidate. If you follow him on social media, he's very salt of the earth, Midwestern guy. If you follow his Facebook at all, he eats a ham sandwich every day for the better part of the last several decades for lunch. And it's just he reminds you of your dad almost to that extent. So when we were really starting to ramp up the campaign, I believe even as early as March of 2015, we had a digital team of almost 10 people at that point. And I was sitting down with the larger part of my team, and, given my data background, my impetus for starting a Snapchat channel is I want to be able to communicate to voters where they're communicating. I am fairly media agnostic. If someone likes to receive direct mail, I'll send them mail. If they like to get a phone call, we'll call them on the phone. If they use Snapchat and that's how they like to communicate with people, we had to make sure that we were on Snapchat. So from an organic sense of being able to one-to-one communicate with voters, particularly younger voters, it was a no-brainer for us.
Mm-hmm. And was that the target audience, the younger voters, or was it really for a broader range?
It was for everybody, but at that point in time and still today, just being honest about Snapchat's universe, it's a massively skewed younger audience. So did I have any illusion that I'd be reaching people 50 or 60 plus on Snapchat? No. That's probably not the appropriate medium for that. At least it wasn't at that point in time. So we were really trying to target college Republicans, people under 35, just give them news and updates from the road with what we were doing and making sure that we were using Snapchat appropriately and not just using it with the same exact content from every other channel.
Mm-hmm. And how do you actually promote it? Because I had a bit of trouble tracking these because you had to sort of really be looking for the usernames of the candidates. So was there an effort to drive traffic to the channel?
Absolutely, yeah. So we promoted our Snapchat account through our various other social channels. With Governor Walker, we had the luxury because of the pretty famous recall election in 2012, in 2011 and 2012 in that state. He had built a fairly large social following. So using Facebook and Twitter and Instagram to promote that account, he would often plug it at events and rallies in person. We've done some advertising towards the Snapchat account before, so we really made a concerted effort to get a significant user base on Snapchat. And
where did you see it fitting into the overall strategy? You were using other platforms to drive traffic to it, but once you're at Snapchat, is that the end, or was there, I did see a couple links to websites, scottwalker.com, but was it kind of the end stop, or was it also a sort of kind of hybrid media type of platform?
Yeah, it was very hybrid media. Snapchat is just another medium for communication. So depending on what we were focused on in the campaign that day or week, we would use it for that purpose, with the understanding that Snapchat is good at certain things and not good at other things. For instance, Snapchat's gotten really good at email acquisition, CPA campaigns, being able to swipe up, type in your email, and collect emails for your email program. Just very powerful tool for that.
Really? Was that available during the election?
We used it a ton on the Trump campaign. We collected hundreds of thousands of emails off of that tool, Trump campaign. At the point for Walker, I think we were a bit early at that point for that tool. But it was really just a branding medium, getting the message out there to places, again, media agnostic. Just because he's going to an event or a rally in a small town in Iowa, the local paper is writing about it, doesn't mean that the younger target demo is reading that paper. So how are we communicating to them and getting that message across on mediums that they're actively using?
And in terms of metrics for the Walker campaign, did you try to log those? Did you have a sense of how many subscribers you had or how many views per day?
This is a cause of massive frustration for us on the Walker campaign, where Snapchat's platform was still very, very new at that point, and it was very difficult to get data out of it at this point. So besides us going in and manually counting, which was crazy and quite laborious, Snapchat couldn't even tell us how many followers we had on our account in an easy way at that point. There was no platform you could go into. Reports were sent to us by CSV. And with any startup, I understand how those things go. But from a data and analytics perspective, it was really hard to track and prove ROI at that point, other than just regular engagement metrics and view-through rates on videos. So I would say fairly safely that our Snapchat following broke 10,000 people probably at that point. Mm-hmm. And obviously we were a short-lived campaign, so we didn't really get much attention, post-September of 2015. So the analytics and data piece was tough, but we had faith in the program because of the type that we were engagement, and with the metrics that we were getting back from Snapchat, we felt good about it because it wasn't a big investment.
Right. And speaking of investment, both very early on in the campaign, I know Walker and also John Kasich had put out ad slots that would actually be inserted into people's stories. So my question is, what's the differences in terms of like pros and cons of an ad? And I think right now they're running a lot of Amazon Prime. Can't get rid of them. But do you get different metrics from that versus the counts you get from your stories, or what's the added value of putting in an ad slot?
Right. So we were actually the first Republican campaign to ever advertise on Snapchat was the Walker campaign. And the Kasich people will try to say they were, but I can tell you with a fact, they were not to that end. But to that point, early on, you couldn't get any organic stats out of Snapchat. So the only stats that we were getting back or data was from paid advertising. So the purpose of doing paid advertising at that point was to really get a sense of engagement, but it also gave you a different way to get into people's feeds and really grow your follower base. So, putting an ad in the discovery section on one of the news channels for Wall Street Journal or ESPN or something like that provides a lot of value. Being able to get your content in front of people that wouldn't organically try to look you up and find you, mm-hmm. because to your earlier point, it wasn't the easiest to be able to go and find someone new to follow on Snapchat at this point in time. So the real benefit of advertising on Snapchat was just to get our content in front of people that wouldn't natively go look for us and find us, because that process is actually quite difficult early on. At least when we were using Snapchat in the election cycle. So broadening our base, trying to find new people, really growing an audience, because outside of celebrities and entertainment figures, other industries were slow to really grow big followings and audiences, but also eligible voters were just starting to use the platform as well, because we have to remember that Snapchat's user base has a ton of people under 18 years old. And that is not people, given the way U.S. elections work, that is not people that we're interested in talking to. Mm-hmm. So we can't receive donations from them and they can't vote. So advertising was really our way to get a bigger microphone and reach the audiences we wanted to reach.
Got it. And I have a question about the content. Like, what was the idea about what would actually be snapped? And what was kind of Governor Walker's interaction? I mean, he was social media savvy. I checked out his Instagram the other day. It has tons of pictures. So was he sort of amicable to Snapchat?
Yeah, so Governor Walker is relatively a pretty young guy for politics. He is, in his early 40s, and he is very into social media, clearly by what you would see, but almost in a way where it's like, it's fun, it's comical, it's relatable. Like, again, if your dad was going to take a picture and post it on social media, it's not like some artistic Instagram post. It's like almost a blurry photo of a zoom in on like some sandwich or a picture of his shirt from some mm-hmm. Milwaukee Bucks game or something like that. So he's a big user of social, and he likes to post things himself on social media. He understands, just like we all did, that you want to be able to communicate with every audience. So he'll understand when good times are to say, hey, let's put this on Snapchat or Instagram, or let's post this picture to Facebook. And when it comes to his mind, obviously he consults his team, and it's not, a total unilateral decision, but it is really authentic to the brand. And I keep coming back to that word, because authenticity really means everything in social media. And the second people don't find you being genuine, you start to lose a follower base.
Mm-hmm. And why is that, do you think? What's that? It's something that academics are very interested in, this concept of authenticity, which is theoretically very challenging. But in your view, what's the connection between authenticity and social media for political campaigns?
People in the U.S. are sick of politics as usual. And I think a good analogy here is and I don't mean this in a political sense, 'cause I'm not trying to make a political statement, but if you look at Trump versus Clinton to that end, Hillary Clinton's part of a political dynasty of families. Everything she says sounds very scripted. She doesn't really come off as like genuine and authentic, and she's just part of a political class that's been around for a long time. Donald Trump, for better or for worse, is extremely authentic. Like, you know exactly what you're going to get. And there is a big trust factor with that and a big nostalgia factor. And from a psychographic and personality standpoint, nostalgia is a massive driver and trust is a massive driver in terms of who you're going to vote for in elections. There's a reason why the research question, which candidate would you rather have a beer with, is a massive indicator of who's going to win the election, because people want a president that's relatable. They want a president that's going to keep them safe and take care of them, but they also want a president that they could actually feel like is one of their own. And that's where authenticity comes into play.
Mm-hmm. And let's transfer to the Trump campaign. And my first question is, did you jump on the Trump campaign before the general election?
I did not. So
okay.
I was an employee of the Walker campaign, and I worked for the Trump campaign through my agency, Cambridge Analytica. And I joined the Trump campaign in late May, early June. So there was about a 5 to 6 month break in between where I was not doing campaign work. And if you told me 5 to 6 months prior that I'd been working for Donald Trump, I would have said you were crazy. But the way this industry works, you never know where you're going to end up.
So what's the difference between running a primary campaign versus the general election?
Absolutely. So this was a very unique year for primaries. 17 Republican candidates made it very challenging to be able to get your message through the noise, especially when you have pretty typical by-the-book Republican campaigns where, you know, there's a way you do things, a way you say things, and Trump kind of blew up that entire process. And using Snapchat or doing digital marketing or doing any types of new media tactics inside of campaigns change massively every cycle. So the fact that there's 17 candidates and we have a lot of new tools to use like Snapchat in election year just makes things very different and very difficult. Just because you have a Snapchat account doesn't mean that anyone's actually looking at the content that you're putting out. Or just because, you know, you're spending money on ads doesn't mean that anybody cares about it. I mean, Trump was able to build a massive amount of support with relatively little paid advertising compared to things like the Jeb Bush Super PAC and other organizations. And in a primary, it's typically a race to win your base. So it's what can I say to win the core base of the Republican Party. In a general election, you're running back to the middle and trying to reach persuadable voters who haven't made up their mind and appeal to a wider group of people or a wider audience. But also, you know, the scope and scale of who you're talking to is magnified tenfold at that point, because in a primary, it's very much state after state, Super Tuesday, different weeks and different months have different states that come up. And depending on the year, a candidate could pull away early or it could go a long way into the primary process. And general election, you know, November 8th is election day. You've got to win 270 electoral votes, and that's it. So you're trying to reach a lot of people in a short amount of time with a massive cash infusion. I mean, really, this is the most ultimate form of a startup that exists in the world, is running a presidential campaign. You got to hire thousands of people. You're spending hundreds of $millions. And on a definitive end date, you've got to own 50+1% market share in your given area. And just a crazy problem to solve. Mm-hmm. So the way you message and the way you use tactics and who you're talking to are totally different in a general versus primary.
Interesting. And I want to go to this, the Trump and Hillary distinction, which is, for me, if you look at the academic literature, it's a lot about the Democrats as the leading digital force, right? With the vote builder, voter rolls, and Obama's use of social media, the MyBo page. How do you think Trump won the election. Was digital more of a focus for Trump than it would have been for the Hillary campaign, or how important was digital for the Trump team?
Yeah, for the better part of the last 8 years, Republicans have taken a pretty big shellacking when it comes to data, digital, and technology in our space. I mean, the Obama team really pushed the envelope and kind of modernized the techniques that we see today in campaigning. But Republicans certainly caught up this year. And I wouldn't say that it was more of an emphasis on the Trump campaign, because Hillary had massive teams. Like, her data team was bigger than ours. Her digital team was bigger than ours. They got more money and funding. But I think the way that we used and executed the tactics was run much more like a business instead of run like a typical campaign. And one of the biggest flaws the Hillary campaign had was that they tried to copy the Obama playbook from 2012 and apply it to her, when they should have come up with a unique and innovative strategy that applied to someone like Secretary Clinton. Because, there was one piece of passing wisdom that Harper Reed, who was the CTO of the Obama campaign, gave after he kind of left this world, which was, every time a campaign ends, you should blow it up and start from scratch. And the Hillary campaign did not blow up the last Obama campaign and start from scratch. So we built the program that was very custom and unique to our candidates, because good candidates with good messages win elections. Digital, data, tech platforms, that all helps on the margins, but those things can't fix bad candidates. Mm-hmm. So we start with a good candidate with a message that was resonating with the American people, and we just pour gasoline on the fire with the type of techniques that we're using.
And so in 2016, with all of these new tools, and where, mobile use is something like 98% of people under 30, how important is digital, in the sense that, can digital win elections, or is it more of a complement to traditional TV advertising?
I think that's a difficult way to look. I don't look at the problem that way, again, because that's like saying, does communications win elections? Because I don't think it depends on what the medium is. I think it depends on what the message is. And you just want to be able to find the right person at the right time with the right message. And listen, if you're not on digital by this point and really investing in using digital, like I would be shocked and don't want to know you from a campaign perspective. But in terms of advertising dollars, there's been this debate for the last 8 years, when will digital finally outspend TV? And on the Trump campaign, that pretty much almost happened to that end. Like, you saw massive investment into digital advertising. And again, I think it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. It just so happens that in U.S. politics, most of our audience that's coming out to vote is over 50 years old, or a lot of them. And demographics are changing, and I understand that. So we have to reach people where they were. But as you and I probably know, our parents and grandparents are on things like Facebook now. They are, everyone's searching things on Google or Bing or Yahoo, whatever it may be. So I want to be in front of as many outlet channels as possible without annoying people where I can be. And if you don't have a proper digital strategy, it is going to make it that much more difficult to be able to get your candidate's message across. And when you're talking about states this year that won by thousands of votes, yeah, that could win or lose an election. Do I think it was the key for this year? No, but it certainly played a role. Mm-hmm.
And I want to go back to the Trump Snapchats, which I completely missed. What was he snapping about? I mean, we can't go back and get them. So was it different or similar to Walker's strategy?
It was a bit different. A lot of so Dan Scavino is pretty well known now. He's in the White House. He was with Mr. Trump all the time. He helped run a lot of those social accounts when Mr. Trump was obviously very busy. So he kind of manned the Snapchat account, as well as Mr. Trump's body man. So it was a lot of like behind the scenes footage of events and rallies and on the road and meeting voters. It wasn't so much that Mr. Trump would pick up the phone and talk direct to camera. It was more helping understand the size of the movement. Snapchat was a fantastic tool for us to be able to keep growing the quote unquote Trump train, or keeping the MAGA movement alive and really reaching a base of people. And when you're talking about, one of the biggest sources for fundraising this year for the Trump campaign was merchandise. The campaign sold hundreds of thousands of hats this year. And the most people buying those hats that are pretty iconic now were young people. And we did a lot of sponsored filters. You could actually put on a Trump hat, and we did, for different debates and events. So there was the organic side that was very much paired up with a paid advertising side to make it really effective of growing this singular movement.
Interesting. And one of the things that at least in the early primaries that I've been looking at in this paper, is, that my kind of conclusion was that Snapchat wasn't that effective for data acquisition because there was no way to get data. But you were talking about that you could get emails. Like, can you go into how that transformed and what type of data you were able to get?
Yeah. So campaigns for online advertising, emails to the lifeblood. Almost 70% or over 70% of all money raised online comes from email programs. So there is a massive investment made in campaigns to grow the size of their email list. And we gathered tens and hundreds of thousands of emails off the Snapchat platform. It's basically an ad unit where you show an ad and the user has the ability to swipe up and type in their email, and that's what you get. Outside of being able to collect emails, there's not really much else you can get or pull out of these platforms, especially social platforms anymore. Most social companies have gone the way of what's called the walled garden, particularly Facebook and Google, where Facebook, for example, in 2012, the Obama team built a tool called Targeted Share, which is totally built off the Facebook API, where it allowed you to share your friends list with this tool, and it would recommend which friends of yours were persuadable and what you should say to them to convince them to vote for the president, which is a really cool thing. But in April of 2015, they shut down that API, and Facebook now, you have to buy advertising to be able to access their data, and you can't pull it out of the platform. So Twitter is really the only open fire hose left where you can get data out of it. But Twitter data is great, but it doesn't represent most voters in America. It's a minority of very vocal people.
Right.
So Snapchat for us wasn't so much like a raw data play as much as it was, let's communicate with people, grab some email addresses, grow our list, and get them to engage with us in other ways. And once I have that email and they opt in and getting emails from me, I can then try to get them to do other things and learn more about them.
Right. And I want to ask you a little bit about micro-targeting, but first, there's been a lot of media buzz around Cambridge Analytica, both in Brexit and the U.S. election. What is Cambridge Analytica all about, and what's their approach to political campaigning?
So Cambridge Analytica, at our core, we are a data and behavioral science company. So simply put, we help campaigns, companies, organizations, government institutions figure out who to talk to and what to say to them to get them to take some type of measurable action, whether it be to vote or purchase a consumer good or change brand perception. Our fundamental belief is, while the mediums in which we communicate with people have drastically changed over time, the way that we choose to communicate with people hasn't really innovated since Mad Men, 1950s David Ogilvy style creative, which is a bunch of old white guys get in a room and figure out what they want to say to certain audiences, which is a very backwards way of doing things. As an example, you may be watching polling in a state and seeing that you're losing a lot of female vote. So a bunch of guys get together and say, okay, we have to produce an ad for women to get their vote back, which is actually quite offensive when you think about it. That assumes that all women think alike and care about the same issues. And that's just not how it works. And we find that things like personality and more data-driven modeling allows us to decipher the most appropriate ways, not only of who to communicate to, but what exactly to say to them. From everything from image choice to wording to tonality to sentiment to language, understanding deeply someone's personality allows us to get to that level of communication. And Cambridge Analytica and our parent company SEL Group have been doing campaigns around the world since the early 90s. A lot of our methodology was used on the ANC race with Nelson Mandela in South Africa in the early 90s. We've done elections. We currently have elections going in Africa and South America and in Eastern and Western Europe. So elections are nothing new for the company, but the U.S. elections only started about 2013 with Cambridge, and I joined at the end of 2015. And our approach is everything from, we do polling and research, we do data science and modeling, database building, data analysis. We do marketing, so TV advertising and digital advertising. So we're pretty much a full service agency, but we're not creative. We are data first, which makes us a bit unique.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And as you were saying, I think the key word is persuasion. I mean, we talked about it with the Obama campaign and getting your list of persuadable friends. And Cambridge Analytica developed an algorithm that would generate top cities to target based on the number of persuadable voters in those cities.
Right.
Can you talk about that algorithm and kind of the Trump approach to micro-targeting more broadly?
Yeah, so that's one good example as we talk about, trying to reach the right voter at the right place at the right time. So we built a tool for the operations team, and that's the team in the campaign that helps figure out all the candidates' travel. And there were several times during the campaign where the press was reporting about how erratic Mr. Trump's travel schedule looked from the outside. What they didn't know is there was a very sophisticated data operation happening behind the scenes in a very sophisticated way to pick out where he should be going. So the cities to visit calculator took all of the cities in the 17 battleground states that we were targeting across the country, and it ranked them 1 to tens of thousands based on the density of persuadable voters in a given area, but also with enough core supporters to be able to hold a rally that's not boring, where you actually have enthusiasm and people there. Mm-hmm. And since we were in the field every day with polling for the last 3.5 to 4 months of the election, it allowed us to be able to update that every day in a platform for the operations team. So for instance, like Miami in Florida was almost always number one across the entire election. The suburbs of Pittsburgh, the suburbs of Milwaukee, Southwest and Northwest Pennsylvania, all states that became very significant in the election. But we just wanted to put Mr. Trump in the right place and get beyond this idea that candidates only have to go to big cities to communicate with voters because that's where the major media markets are. There were times where Mr. Trump would go to towns of 10,000 people and turn out 30,000 people for a rally. When you have that type of enthusiasm, people traveling all over the place, it has a massive impact on persuading, but also turning out voters to show up and vote.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that emails are the lifeblood of the campaign. Was that kind of the lifeblood also of this algorithm?
Emails are the lifeblood of fundraising on a campaign. Okay. Yeah, they are very helpful in for political things too. So like turning people out to events and rallies and letting people know like when election day was or when you could early vote. Emails are massively important communications tools, but they are certainly king when it comes to fundraising. Even things like text messaging as well is getting much bigger in this space to be able to communicate to people on a one-to-one level. So we had all of these different arrows in our quiver, so to say, and depending on what we wanted to do, we may use all of them or we may use a few.
Mm-hmm. And it's something I'm still a bit unclear about. I'm sure there's tons of different strategies to utilize, but can you kind of just at the most general level, how does micro-targeting actually work? Like if you have an email or you have someone's profile and you collect their location data and then you give them a persuadable message, I mean, how does that work step by step?
Yeah, so let's start, you got to start with the database first. So typical database in the political sense, like the RNC, the Republican National Committee, has a pretty extensive voter database. This is type of data like who you are, where you live, what elections you voted in, how often you vote, if someone from the RNC called you or knocked on your door, how you responded. So very voter-centric information. From there, in modern campaigns now, we combine that with like commercial data. So this is purchase history, demographics, geographics, thousands of data points on every individual that is available for us to buy in the market through some big data providers. And then finally, you combine that with first-party campaign data. So that's data that campaigns collect. Donors, event attendees, volunteers, signups. Once you merge that all into one centralized big database, then what you have to do is research and polling, because databases by nature are static, and research and polling is what makes them alive and dynamic. So we would go into the field every week in each of the 17 battleground states and conduct about 1,500 surveys in each of them. And that would allow us to then produce models. So if I have 1,500 responses in New Hampshire, depending on what they say to each of my questions, I'm asking about 12 questions, and each question ties back directly to a model. So if we're talking on the phone and I say, head to head, are you more likely to vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, or with these four candidates, who are you most likely to vote for on a Likert scale of 1 to 5, whatever it may be? I take those responses, and then my data scientists look-alike model out the rest of the electorate in the state to build segments and audiences. So I say, these are Trump supporters, these are people who love to reduce taxes, these are gun supporters, these are the religious rights, all based on survey data and database data that I have and I brought in. From there, we're then segmenting audiences for the purposes of our media teams to buy digital ads or to buy television, but also for creative teams to be able to craft messages. So the images, the ads, the types of things we're actually saying to people. Those two things then come together. We spend money to do paid media. And then we go back in the field again, and we're consistently polling and testing to see if what we're doing is working and how effective it is. So it's a pretty massive process, but it's what I spent all of my time doing the last 3 years in each of those processes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it seems to be quite effective. Mike, I have a question. It's also something that I've run into myself doing some social media data, and it goes to these databases, which around the question of ethics. I mean, in terms of some individuals are having their data, whether it's, I'm assuming most of it's public, that's being reappropriated. How do you meet that criticism that this is perhaps unethical, or maybe it's too personal, or you're getting, maybe citizens aren't well informed about what their data is being used for?
Yeah, it's particularly a double-edged sword for someone like me who is a conservative and who is a libertarian and believes strongly in privacy. How do you toe that line between intrusive and convenient and helpful? And the U.S. in particular, I mean, you're in Europe, and I'm sure you know this. European data law and EU data law is extremely restrictive. Mm-hmm. Like, even countries like France and Germany go even farther, where it's almost impossible to keep PII or personally identifiable information on people in these countries. But the U.S. is kind of the Wild West when it comes to data, where obviously nothing that we do is illegal, but and I wouldn't say all the data we use is public, because we're buying a lot of this data from commercial sources that they're not collecting it publicly. It's relationships with credit card companies and utility companies. It's very commercialized in the U.S. at this point. But what we find is that when users or voters are given the choice between convenience or privacy, they almost pick convenience every time. Mm-hmm. Because it's a lot easier to use products that allow them to access your data because they're good and well-funded products than it is to use privacy tools or to hide certain things about yourself or to not engage on social media. So we have to be very careful and take a lot of provisions that we're not being invasive or not doing anything inappropriate when it comes to using voter data or consumer data. But when it comes down to it, what I tell people all the time is one, we're giving them more personalized messaging. So most advertising people get, I would imagine, doesn't resonate very well with them. Our whole goal is to give a more personalized approach to marketing. But also, you hear the term micro-targeting, and everyone wants to think that we're talking to each individual at a one-to-one level. But that's impossible. I mean, my persuadable audience this election in the Trump campaign was 15 million people, which means at a one-to-one level, I've produced 15 million different iterations of creative to talk to those people, mm-hmm. which of course isn't happening. Micro-targeting, which is a term that I don't use anymore, it's kind of outdated. Data science or behavioral targeting or one-to-one targeting, whatever it is, it's much more about clustering people into homogenous groups than it is about talking to Matt or Steve or Dan or Lindsay or whoever at a one-to-one level. And we want to put you into groups of like 6 or 8 or 12 groups of people that look like you and vote like you and have similar interests as you to provide a more welcoming experience.
Huh. And is that where Facebook rules? Because I've put out a few ads for the podcast, and seeing the kind of the functions you can use to build audiences, and I've heard from others that that's kind of its market niche in terms of advertising. Is that true? Is Facebook is that king for advertising for campaigns?
If Facebook became king this year, it was the most effective platform for us across both fundraising, persuasion, and get out the vote. The thing is, Facebook has more data on you than anybody does. Maybe Google gives them a run for their money, but what we can send in Facebook to tell them about ourselves is just incredible. And like I said before, Facebook has gone to a walled garden approach, and they keep all of their learnings hidden behind, and their algorithms don't really open the box and tell you how they're produced. But what they do really works, and it's really effective. And we spent more money on Facebook than any other advertising platform this year. That's for sure.
And do you think that will continue to hold in the future?
Yeah, as long as Facebook can continue to hold its market share in the industry and keep its usage up as a platform, which, obviously that seems like it'd be foolish to say that Facebook's going to go anywhere, but people have said the same thing about massive companies that no longer exist. So certainly in 2018 and 2020, Facebook will be a massive player. I do not see that changing. Who knows what the next 10 years of tech and politics holds. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's not to try to predict the future with these things and let it come as they come. and what will the next social network be? A different type of Snapchat or a different video platform, or what is the next gen of this stuff going to be? Will be really interesting to see.
Absolutely. And I have one last question for you, which I'm just personally curious about, which is there was a lot of talk about Trump and his Twitter use and his campaign trying to take the phone away from him. Did that happen, or was it free hands for Trump?
I think anybody who has followed the election or knows anything about Mr. Trump knows that it is impossible. He runs his own show. Taking his phone away from him is not a realistic possibility. So, when it comes to things like tweets and speeches, I mean, that is Mr. Trump. He is his own man. Again, Dan Scavino helps him with some of that stuff, but we try to control the controllables on campaigns, and there are just some things that aren't worth the fight.
All right. Glad to put that to rest. Well, Matt, thanks so much for your time. This has been super insightful.
Thank you so much.
I've just been speaking with Matthew Oczkowski, head of product at Cambridge Analytica. You can follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Oczkowski. And remember, you can follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Any comments, feedback, suggestions for future episodes are more than welcome. You can write us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast or on Facebook, facebook.com/Social Media and Politics Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.